Hello, this is Dr. Dennis Bielfeldt, President of the Institute of Lutheran Theology. Today I want to talk to you about the Platonism of the Old Academy, Middle Platonism, and Neoplatonism. These movements were very important for the development of Christianity, and I think as we go through some of this material, you're going to find some very interesting thoughts that might make you think a little bit about the doctrine of the Trinity, perhaps. I'd like to start with the Old Academy, and I want to say at the beginning of this lecture that it would take a lifetime to understand all of these thinkers that make up these traditions. Many of these names are not household names. You could get a PhD in philosophy and not know many of these names. And certainly you could get a PhD in theology and not know many of these names, because I did these things and I did not know a lot of these names before I started to read. What I want to talk to you about is the inheritance of the Timaeus. And of course you remember from last time that Timaeus is this great work by Plato that had a profound impact upon the development of later traditions of thinking, certainly in the academy, and then also upon Christianity. For the next 1,000 years, people were talking about the Timaeus. David Runio, in his book Philo of Alexandria and the Timaeus of Plato, it's a very good book, by the way, lists 5 key questions descending from the Timaeus. Question number 1, is the creation event in time or is it eternal? And you might remember last time I talked about this under the categories of the so-called in theory, in the order of becoming, or in time, and in esse, in the order of being. So are we talking about an actual temporal creation event in the Timaeus, or are we talking about an explanation, an ontological explanation in terms of ontological dependency? This is what we're thinking about here, and of course different thinkers had different views of this within these traditions. What is the demiurge? You'll remember from last time that the demiurge is this craftsman character that takes the forms, the world of the forms, and then out of matter, right, or the receptacle, creates things, physical things, according to this plan. So the demiurge is neither really in the realm of becoming or in the realm of being, it seems. He's not totally in the realm of becoming, because seems to be, if he is in the realm of becoming, he's a top story of the realm of becoming, but he's not like other things. He's creating them. And of course, he's not timeless like the forms, so his ontological status is something one could debate. What is the nature and reality of the receptacle? This is the space in which physical things take shape. This is what the area in which the demiurge is creating things. Then the next question, how does the Timaeus relate to Plato's unwritten documents and to the divided line and cave? And of course, we talked a little bit last week about the divided line and the cave. And when we get to the academy here, what happened after Plato's death and what he was doing at the end of his life, we certainly know that a lot of people were talking about some of these lectures that Plato was doing. And the question is, well, what was he saying? Because, of course, he didn't write them down. And perhaps he didn't write them down because he wasn't sure yet whether they should be written down. Maybe they were part of a dialectic conversation back and forth. And of course, in the 7th letter, which some people believe is actually spurious, maybe Plato didn't do the 7th letter, but when I went to graduate school, I learned it as one of Plato's letters, one of Plato's documents. And of course, here Plato talks about how it is not the case that philosophy can be easily written down. So maybe Plato's real philosophy is somehow in these lectures here at the academy at the end of his life that weren't written down. How is the human soul, there's another question, related to the world soul? You'll remember that in the receptacle, we're taking the forms, and the craftsman is creating the realm of physical objects. But, of course, the cosmos is living, right? It's got a soul, a world soul, because it's being fashioned out of the form of animality. So how is the human soul related to the world soul, right? To the demiurge, the craftsman, and to the forms? These are all big questions. Well, the demiurge is nous, it seems, for Plato. It has mind, it is mind, and it imposes the order of the realm of the forms on this disorderly realm of necessity. And there's only so much that the demiurge can do with the material that he has. There are certain necessary features of it, or it has, and he has to construct out of this stuff reality, right? But there are necessities that he cannot change. The receptacle is the medium in which and out of which sensory images appear. This is very plainly the case. A cursory reading of the Timaeus seems to suggest this. So the Timaeus, which is a likely story for Plato, explains reality's structure, right? And it shows or displays the dependence of reality on the realm of the forms. But as Arunia points out, the solution of the problem of the one and the many, and perhaps the problem of participation of particulars in the forms, is not solved. And of course, part of all of this is the so-called third man argument that Plato himself brings against his doctrine. Third man argument says that a participation of a particular in a form would have to be a participation in virtue of something, right, which presupposes another form to compare the particular to the first form. And so this keeps going, and it's supposed to be an argument, an infinite regress that would show the absurdity of the theory of the forms. And here we don't know exactly what Plato thought about this argument, finally. And indeed, you get into this literature, and there's opinions all over the scholarly world about the degree to which his nephew Speusippus believed that the third man argument was destructive of the theory of the forms, the degree to which Plato may have been moved by his nephew Speusippus's views or not moved, and then how Plato might have tried to respond to this third man argument if he indeed thought it was a serious argument. So these are all interesting questions, and of course you can do lots of reading on these things. The Timaeus in the academy and subsequently was likely read with these problems, that is the problem of participation, problem of the one and many, over and against what Plato seemed to be teaching. And again, we don't exactly know why he was talking about the one and the indefinite dyad. But Plato seems to have certainly is reputed to have said, now the one I'm going to write here, sometimes that's called the monad, right? And the indefinite dyad for Plato. It seems as if we have the one and the indefinite dyad now being the co-polar principles out of which everything is generated. Well, if that's the case, how does this fit in with the Timaeus, with the forms, with the demiurge? How does this all go together? So we have big questions. We do know that the Old Academy, we call it the Old Academy, was founded by Plato in Athens. And its tradition did seem to depend upon these unwritten lectures of Plato. And there we have Michelangelo's depiction of the Academy. What a wonderful place it would have been, right? Can you believe anything better than just getting together with friends and talking about philosophy? Yes, much better than television. In his unwritten work, Plato distinguishes the one, here we go again, right? Or the monad, from the indefinite dyad right here. And one might see this in terms of unity and diversity. I don't know, whenever I look at this, I always go back to our good friend Anaximander, right? The unlimited and the limited. But anyway, you can map that perhaps over here. Some would say no. But Aristotle and, of course, others report that Plato was talking about the one in the dyad, indefinite dyad. It seems that the one is imposed. Plato wants to impose it on the dyad. And from this, all numbers are generated, right? So one indefinite dyad. When you think of dyad, you think of two things: monadic, dyadic. An indefinite dyad. You might think of the notion of any sort of relational terms: smaller, larger, hot, cold, hotter, hottest, not so hot. Anyway, it seems as if Plato was, of course, Plato was always very interested in Pythagorean thought, and indeed some thought in the ancient world that he was, the true representative of the Pythagoreans. The tetractys, of course, is this notion of the 10, and if you add, you could do this in your head, add 1, 2, 3, and 4, you get 10, right? And of course, 1 corresponds to a point. 2 points make a line. 3, well, now I got a plane, right? I got 1, 2, this way, plane. 4, I got a solid. Cool. So 10 must be a number that has some real significance. Now, of course, Plato is talking about how the demiurge brings reality into being. The world soul now somehow mediates between number and matter, perhaps, in this way of thinking, projecting the 4 dimensions into matter and constituting the 4 elements. And as we look at all of these thinkers, let's be assured that this is an introductory lecture. There's not enough known about all of these guys, at least to know exactly what they all thought and to be able to follow up all the scholarly trails here, certainly in a lecture like this. Again, what we're trying to do is we're trying to introduce people a bit here at the Institute of Lutheran Theology to the notion that there was such an academy and that there were thinkers like this and that this academy had a great effect on the intellectual tradition of the West and the development of Christian theology. Okay, the old academy thinkers, and then now we're going to talk about the old academy being from the institution of the academy by Plato after his death to its ending in Athens in about 85. And so this old academy, the thinkers tend towards a type of dualism as we see. The first man we want to talk about is Speusippus. There's a great name, Speusippus. Speusippus lived from 407 to 339 BC, but then he died. He is Plato's nephew. This is Speusippus. He was Plato's nephew, became head of the academy in 347. Everything we know about him seems to suggest that he was a very original thinker and that maybe the third man argument for him showed the absurdity of Plato's theory of the forms because he seems to have rejected them. And he, instead of this sort of one versus a dyad here, he places the one above nous in a way. So now we got the one over here. And we have nous, or mind, here in some way. The dyad now has to produce all things by itself somehow. And the cosmos is eternally generated out of this. Now, if this all sounds very sketchy, let me assure you that it is. We can maybe make some comparison between Plato and his nephew Speusippus. For Plato, of course, the form of the good is the one and has being, right? So when Plato talks about the one, he's talking about the form of the good. Full being, the good, the one. But for Speusippus, it seems like the one cannot just be identified with the good, and it does not have being like Plato thought it did. Well, this gets us into some interesting kinds of intellectual puzzles. Plato thought that beings certainly must participate in being and get being from its participation in being. But here for Speusippus, it appears that beings get being from something alien to them. Because if the one is above the good, and the good is identified with being, then the one which literally is non-good or non-not good also, because it's above the good, this one has a different order than the order of being. This is sometimes called a principle of alien order or something. Alien, I can't remember. But anyway, it's all right. We're okay here. So anyway, for Speusippus, this one gets stripped of being, perhaps. And we have for Plato, the one down here associating with the dyad. So for Plato, we have the one down here associating with the indefinite dyad. And you might think of the indefinite dyad as the large and the small, right? And if you think about this a bit, I mean, there's a certain plausibility here. If you have something that's larger or smaller, you must have something that is larger or smaller. So the larger and smallerness must work upon something that is. So the one from which being flows here is the isness upon which the larger and the smaller operate. So you have smaller things and larger things, see? So you can kind of see how you can maybe, thinking deeply about this, talk about how these two, we might call them, these two concepts can generate other things. Now, if any of you have read Hegel, hold on through a lot of this stuff because you may see dim precursors of Hegelian dialectic through some of these thinkers. Now, for Speusippus, the dyad is plurality. For Plato, it's more like the larger or the smaller. Here, it's plurality. And for Speusippus, the one associates with plurality. And the plurality then comes out of that which is, I suppose, so unbounded as not to even be the principle of being. I suggest that must be how to think these things. Both thinkers believe that derivative entities come from these. There is a great picture of Speusippus's demiurge. Like that guy? For Speusippus, we have nous, the demiurge. Now, nous gets identified with the demiurge. And if you think about it, I mean, going back to Plato, right? We have the forms up here. We have the demiurge. And then we have the receptacle down here. And we have the demiurge taking the forms and impressing them in the receptacle for Spoisipus and Plato. I mean, this demiurge has a kind of agency. We can identify that with the nous, particularly for Spoisipus, but it has an agency. And it's below the one for Spoisipus and the infinite dyad, indefinite dyad. Why do I always say infinite? Well, an infinite thing is an indefinite thing too, right? If you think of infinite in the original sense, it means not bounded. So it's not bound in particular ways. So we have the one and the dyad. Somehow here we have the nous bringing things about. As is pointed out other places, our friend Spoisipus seemed to be a very creative guy. He seems to have advocated an epistemological holism. Now, epistemology, of course, has to do with knowing. And a holism is a word that we use in philosophy to talk about how the parts are dependent upon the whole, right? So an epistemological holism would suggest that we can't know a thing as the thing it is unless we know a bunch of other things as in the whole context. Today we might say that those who would claim that context determines the meaning of each part in a reading, that would be a holistic reading. If context is always that which determines the meaning of the parts. If you believe that the parts have a certain meaning of themselves, then from which the whole comes, then you're talking about a semantic atomism. A semantic holism would say that the meaning of the parts is dependent upon the whole. Semantic atomism would say that the meaning of the whole is dependent upon the parts. These are very general things I'm saying. To know a thing, one must know each other thing that is not that thing. Well, great. So Aristotle is talking about Eudemus's view, that was likely Spoisipus's as well, Spoisipus's. For a thing is the same as that form from which it does not differ, and it is other than that from which it differs. And you can think about that a while, right? He probably followed his teacher and Uncle Plato. How would you like to have an uncle by the name of Plato? Uncle Plato, coming for supper. Yes. We're going to talk about some ideas tonight. Uncle Plato is coming. He was a realist with regards to numbers. Now, when we talk about a realist with regards to numbers, we would be wanting to say that in some sense, numbers exist independent of human awareness, perception, conception, and language. I use that kind of terminology when I talk about realism. I get it from my teacher, Paniat Buchfroth, at the University of Iowa, a great metaphysical mind, I always believed, and this is how he cast this. Realism has to do with what exists apart from human awareness, perception, conception, and language. Clement of Alexandria writes, now we're going to talk about ethics, Spoisipus, Plato's nephew, says that happiness is the completed state in things that hold by nature or possession of goods, for which condition all men have desire, while the good ones aim at untroubledness, oiklesia, and the excellences are productive of happiness. Now you're saying, why did you say this? Why did you read this? What did it mean? Well, it seems to mean that Spoisipus is already thinking thoughts that would later be certainly thought in the Epicureans and the Stoic schools. He rejects hedonism. Now, I need to tell you that when people identify Epicurus with hedonism, they normally think that Epicurus was a crude hedonist. We don't really believe that's the case. If Epicurus was here, I think he'd rather sit under a tree and have a couple sips of wine and talk about geometric proofs than probably go to the orgy. So I don't think he was a crude hedonist because, of course, Epicurus knew that after one is crudely pleasure-seeking, this certainly brings with it a number of ramifications, many of them unpleasant. So, anyway, not to get off the subject here, Speusippus seems to reject hedonism, and his view that virtue alone is sufficient for happiness, however, seems to be in tension with his admission that there are non-moral goods. And you know what? I put that in there, but I'm not going to talk about that in this lecture because it's basically we're interested in his views with regard to metaphysics and epistemology. So that's a lot to say so far. We've talked a bit about Speusippus, the Timaeus. We've talked a bit about Plato. We haven't talked in depth about any of these things, which we can't do. But I want to give you a flavor that there was lots of intellectual activity happening in this academy. And all these guys were talking to each other and arguing. And in the next lecture, we're going to see how Aristotle fits into all of this. So I'll come right back with the next lecture, which will be on the Old Academy. We'll pick up from Speusippus. Thank you.